Well, I'm Chris van Slambroek from Triple 11, but active in the Asia-Europe People's Forum. For those who don't know, the AEPF, the Asia-Europe People's Forum, is a network of civil society organizations and social movements that across Asia and Europe work on alternative pro-people alternatives that challenge dominant economic, social, and political hegemonies. It works for ecological, just, and sustainable policies. AEPF bi-yearly organizes the People's Forum, which provides input into the official European Asia Heads of State meeting, which is called ASEM. We are linked with hundreds of movements across 40 countries in Asia and Europe. Normally, we would have had our AEPF meeting in Indonesia this year, but yeah, due to this exceptional situation and context, we have these online webinars. Welcome to our new series of webinars that cut across our concerns that address different dimensions of the current crisis. For those interested in AEPF, you can always subscribe to our newsletter. You can find, in fact, our website, aepf.info, where you can also get links to our Facebook pages and YouTube channel. We always try to provide some translation for these webinars. We have now the option for Urdu. So, but unfortunately, due to the situation in Indonesia, our Bahasa, say, translator, interpreter was not able to join. So, what I can say is that our interpreter has promised to either say translate or undertitle, subtitle this video that will be say now also say broadcasted on Facebook, and that to subtitle this video in Bahasa, and also provide a text summary of the webinar in Bahasa language. So for those people who would like to opt for the interpretation, you have to press the three dots at the language poll, which appears on your screen. For the Urdu, so for the Urdu option, in fact, you have to tick on the option Chinese, because in Zoom, shame on Zoom, they have no option to say to put Urdu as an option for interpretation. So for the format today, we will start by hearing from our four speakers in two rounds of interventions. We have a very interesting panel today, and at the end, there will be also some room for questions from the participants. So you can share your questions through the session, throughout the session, via the Q&A button. So please use the Q&A button for your questions to the panelists. Throughout the session, we will also be sharing some links to resources and further reading materials in the chat box, and you can also engage there if you want. We have some of our speakers have written already a lot of books and papers, so we will send you some relevant links to these say interesting resources. And finally, if you are on Twitter or other social media, if you want to tweet, you can use the hashtag AEPF webinars, so we can feel free to share your thoughts and reflections with us as well. And now I will head over, say, the moderation to my colleague Anu Chenoy, who will, say, present the webinar.
Thank you, Chris, and I'm delighted and deeply honored to be here for the AEPF webinar on militarized geopolitics versus sustainable people's alternatives. Now, we are joined actually by four excellent speakers, and I will introduce each speaker before they begin their intervention. While I think Mr. Tariq Ali is still to join us, so I think I would like to begin with Marga Ferre, who is a member of the board of Transform Europe, the managing board. She writes for the Transform Europe blog. And if you key her into Google, you will see a lot of very interesting analysis by her, both in English and Spanish. Marga, I think if we can start, if you can present your analysis on the current trends of hegemony, mainly superpower politics led by the US, and the kind of militarization that continues to dominate the international system despite the very clear other multiple traps like the pandemic, etc. Yet a militarized system dominates. Now, does race and the colonial project continue in different ways? What is the reality and the view from Europe and your views? Marga, over to you.
Unmute yourself, Marga. Marga.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Excellent, thank you. Sorry, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I, first of all, I would like to thank the Asia European People's Forum to organize a debate like this, which I think is absolutely necessary to have it in these days. Let me introduce myself just a little more. I'm the co-chair, the co-president of Transform Network, which is a network of political foundations and center of studies for critical thinking in Europe. It's a network of 33 organizations of 23 countries in Europe. Just to say that all the thoughts I would like to share with you today are coming from this network, and also for the debate we have from different levels in different countries in Europe. But also because I'm Spanish, as you can see by my accent, I have a strong influence of the Latin American thinking. So maybe it's something that we can share with our excellent speakers today. And before starting my intervention, I would like to say how honored I am to share this panel with Valdan Bello, a Tariq person from I learned a lot in the last year, so I'm dying to hear them. So because they are speaking, I'm not going to focus on the geopolitical question, because I mean, they will do it much, much better than I do. But I would like to start this debate about the militarization and the people's alternatives, or what kind of war we are facing today, stressing the main contradiction we can see in these days when we analyze the power of the United States in the world. This contradiction is that meanwhile in the last decades, the hegemony of the United States in the world, and particularly in Europe, was clearly in all the fields, meaning cultural hegemony, military hegemony, and economic hegemony. We can see now that there is some cracks, some fissures in sort of this monolithic block of the hegemony that the United States imperialism used to have in the last days. What I want to stress is that meanwhile today, we see that the United States, or more precisely, the cultural hegemony emanated by the United States to support a way of watching the world under the capitalist system is clearly undeniable. I mean, the cultural hegemony is clearly dominating the world. We can see also that there is a clear hegemony in militarization, I mean, in terms of the military menace of the United States, but we see also this time that there is no economic hegemony as it used to be in the past. This is the main reason that all of us could see in the narratives coming from the United States and also from Europe, in all the governments who act supporting the, let's say, imperialism of the United States, this kind of new Cold War among the United States and China, or some people want to see this as a new iron curtain among the sphere of influence in economic level from the United States in one part and from China in the other part. I think this is completely absurd. It's not real, and it's more a desire than a reality, and I think it's something that we must to understand, in order to analyze better the relationship that Asia and part of these cracks in the hegemony of the United States in Western world we can see. I would like to focus just a little in what I see and what I call three cracks in the monolithic block of the United States hegemony, at least in Europe, that we see these days. No? The first one is, I think, quite interesting, is some cracks in the cultural hegemony that dominated the last decades. What I see is something interesting is that we had lived in the last 10 years two economic crises, not one, two. The big economic crisis in 2008, and now a new economic crisis but exacerbated by the COVID-19. It is clear that these changes in the structural economic way of living of the majority of the population, I mean, we analyze this economic crisis from the perspective of the people below, not from the macroeconomic perspective. It is clear there has to be some change in the way the people see, particularly the future and how the system works today. Meaning that these changes in the structural system, I mean, the way that people perceive the possibilities of having a better life after these two crises has been absolutely diminishing. I think all around the world, but in Europe is clear, particularly for the young people. And we sum to these two crises the obvious, evident problem we have with the climate change, meaning that we need to change the future. I mean, it's not possible to do the same things that we have done as today. I mean, the change is a necessity, not only because of the COVID or the financial crisis, but also because of the climate change. What we see is that this cultural hegemony that dominated the past has not the same influence in terms that they don't offer any positive future or the possibility of an expectation of a better future for the majority of the population. And that is really something really very important, because we can see in those cultural field that in the past used to sell to all the world, the American way of life is declining. And there is like a demand, a cultural demand for new values, different from the American way of life, different value for the competition, different value for the imperialism, and different values from the military intervention. And I think it's very important for us to understand this, because also open the possibility that, in my perception, open the window for also to know better the Asian cultural field that is introducing little by little in Europe, and help us not to see Asia, and particularly China, as an enemy. I don't think the European population thinks that China is an enemy. In spite of Donald Trump narrative or some European leaders' narrative, it's not a reality thing on the population. I think it's something that we can use in order to strengthen cooperation and kinds of solidarity. But also we can see, besides this cultural crack in the cultural hegemony coming from the United States, I think also there is a reaction in the political field where we can see another crack in the way in the past, particularly after the Berlin Wall fell down, there was like no history. I mean, like no way of doing things in a different way. No, the famous Tina from Margaret Thatcher. No, there is no alternative. No? And there were no alternative in the last 20 years before the 2008 crisis. But after that, I think one of the breaks has done by the far right in Europe. I would like to understand the far right, of the rising of the far right in Europe, and of course in the rest of the world, like Bolsonaro, or in Philippines or the United States, as a symptom of precisely this contradiction. You know? That is that the idea of a world who cannot change, never change, you know, based on the idea of a liberal democracy and a capitalist economic system, is something that is not sustainable anymore, as we decided, we talked before, no? Because of the economic situation of the majority of the population, because of the climate change, and because we need to change the way of doing things in the world in a very obvious way for the population after this coronavirus crisis. No? This far right also is trying to introduce new narratives also, reshaping history, and at the same time basing on idea that is my idea, but based on the idea that at least in Europe, some of them are trying to have some kind of melancholy of the lost empire, if I can say it like this, saying that they look for a past who's supposed to be a best past for their nations, like we can see in the narrative in Hungary, far right, or even the Brexit narrative, based on the idea of the old empire, we can see, more important in the world, things like that. So part of the far right put the outlook on the past and not in the future. And I think it's also an opportunity for us in order to make a counter narrative based on human values in a different way. Try to finalize this first introduction. I would like also to stress something that I think all of us agrees, is that after the first crisis in 2008, the whole world saw how unjust the financial system is and how unsustainable is to do the things the way the financial system wants to do the things. And I think during this pandemic and this coronavirus crisis, it is obvious that it's a human being problem. We must face this problem as a species, not like a nation-based or only in terms of market thinking. We see in Europe this absurd contradiction some governments want to put on the table among human lives and market profits, saying that we cannot take care of the people so much because the economy will be affected. Something that is completely unacceptable under any human being perspective. So under this basis, and the idea of the working class are the heroes of this crisis, meaning that when the time is hard, the people you can rely on is the ordinary people, the common people, who save you in the school, save you in the hospitals, who clean the streets and drops you food to your house. That means some kind of philosophical change in the imaginary of the majority of the people. And I'm sure that will have consequences, not only political, but I hope also economic, and clearly in the necessity of a change. My hope is in that. I honestly think that all these values coming back from this pandemic, meaning caring of people, defending healthcare, defending public education, defending the public, the common, confronting to the selfishness of the capitalism in the last era, is something that I think is a great opportunity for people's alternative to build a new way of understanding the future. My last sentence in this first intervention is that capitalism is in crisis. I think imperialism is in crisis too. Of course, they are looking for new ways of intervention and making this military power a clear menace for a lot of part of the world. Not the same way in the past, like making, coup d'etat, like in Latin America in the 60s and the 70s, not making direct intervention like in Iraq, Libya, or Afghanistan at the beginning of the century, but using another ways, like the lawfare of hybrid wars, using Vijay Prashad terminology, the different way of menacing, but not a direct intervention. And I think it's one of the reasons is because precisely that. I think this crisis is terrible, is sad, is a tragedy, but at the same time, I think or I hope that we can contribute to open the window for a new humanism who confront this absurd idea that the future is not different like the elite or the dominant classes wanted. So I see a lot of people, especially young people, who wants really to change things. And I hope and I think and I will help to make it real. Thank you.
Thank you, Marga, for that excellent opening. The questions will come in later after the second round, but now we have our star speaker and colleague, Professor Walden Bello, Professor Walden Bello hardly needs an introduction, but nonetheless, for our younger audience, Professor Walden Bello is an engaged academic, a social worker, a former member of the Philippines Parliament. He's a senior analyst, and he's co-chairperson of the board of Focus on the Global South. He is a prolific writer, and amongst his outstanding works, very influential works, are Capitalism's Last Stand, Deglobalization in the Age of Austerity, and various articles and books on the analysis of the current situation in China. He is, of course, a member of the international left. Walden, really, a lot of people are looking forward to hearing you, and they want to, many of them really want to also ask you as part of your conversation, you have your own analysis overall, whether the COVID-19 pandemic has fast-paced deglobalization, or does globalization continue with strength? And what the shifts in China, which is marking global geopolitics, as well as the smaller states and people where the BRI extends. So Walden, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Anuradha, and I'm very happy to join Marga and Tariq and all the other participants. I would just like to say that I am going to focus very narrowly on the situation in the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea, as we call it. And then maybe later we can go into the bigger, broad, macro, global issues. So let me just ask Chris if you can flash the PowerPoint.
I will do that.
Okay. Okay, so the title of this first round is Superpower Conflict in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. Next slide, please. Okay, I'd like to make 3 points at the outset. First, the South China Sea, or what we in the Philippines call the West Philippine Sea, is one of the most dangerous places in the world today, the most likely site of a military confrontation between the United States and China. As a Vietnamese official told me on a visit to Vietnam in 2014, quote, "A ship collision can immediately escalate into conventional war," unquote. 2, I strongly disapprove of China's unilaterally claiming 90% of the sea as its national territory, seizing maritime formations belonging to others and fortifying them. That is imperial behavior, pure and simple. Third, that having been said, China has valid strategic concerns in the South China Sea, which borders southeastern China, where most of the country's industrial infrastructure is located. Next slide, please. But before I go into that, I would like to make some comments on the military balance between the United States and China. First, speaking comprehensively, US military might dwarfs China's. China is not even a, quote, peer competitor, unquote, to use a favorite term of the Pentagon. 2, the $250 billion China spent on its military in 2018 was far outstripped by the $649 billion military budget of the United States, which accounted for 36% of worldwide military spending. 3, the strategic nuclear force of China is puny compared to both those of the United States and the Soviet Union, and has not experienced significant upgrading for a long time. Next slide, please. 4, the conventional warfare capabilities of a People's Liberation Army are grossly inferior to that of the United States and are furthermore untested compared to those of the United States, which has been at war every year over the last 19 years. And fifth, while the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PALN, is large, its ships are qualitatively very inferior to those of the United States, which is the most powerful navy in the world. Aircraft carriers are a key measure of offensive capability. And here the United States has 11 state-of-the-art aircraft carriers, 5 of which are deployed in the Pacific. China, in contrast, has 2 Soviet-era aircraft carriers, which are light years behind in design. Next slide, please. Even the US Department of Defense admits that the Chinese military posture is one of, quote, strategic defensive or strategic defense. China's military posture is determined by strategic dilemma. This is the fact that large parts of the US military forces in the Western Pacific lie right on its doorstep, entrenched in bases and military facilities in Japan, South Korea, Guam, and the Philippines, or roaming the waters of the country's southeastern and eastern coasts in the form of the 7th Fleet. Most of China's industrial infrastructure is located in this area, thus making them very vulnerable to destruction, or at the very least, to massive disruption in the event of war with the United States. Next slide, please. In contrast to Beijing's strategic defensive stance, the fundamental strategic posture of the United States is one of the strategic offensive, or in Orwellian language, quote, forward defense, unquote, through the permanent deployment of forces thousands of miles away from the American homeland, ready to strike at any challenger located in the East Asian landmass at a moment's notice. The operative battle doctrine of the United States military is called air-sea battle, which has China as its conceptual foe. As described by one analyst, air-sea battle calls for explosive and electronic strikes against inland command centers, radar systems and intelligence gathering facilities, raids against missile production and storage facilities, and blinding operations against Chinese satellites, unquote. It also calls for cutting off China's seaborne trade with an eye towards exerting major stress on the Chinese economy and eventually internal stress, unquote. Next slide, please. China's moves in the South China Sea must be placed in this defensive context. China's spurious 9-line claims and its fortifying formations like Mischief Reef, which it seized from the Philippines, must be seen as parts of a strategic effort to push the American threat as far to the Western Pacific as possible, so as to buy precious time and space for an effective defense against an American land-based and seaborne strike. Next slide, please. Let me end by saying, again, that the Chinese strategic defensive concern is valid. What is wrong is the way China has acted to meet this concern, which has been through unilateral moves that violate the territorial and economic rights of its neighbors in the South China Sea, specifically Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. There is a better, more principled, and more effective way to satisfy Beijing's strategic defensive concerns. And that is to work with its neighbors to create a demilitarized and denuclearized South China Sea, which we will discuss later. And next slide. So we will take that up during the second round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walden, for that excellent analysis of China, because there's so much curiosity and misunderstanding, because of the dominant narrative of this so-called new Cold War that's doing the rounds in what is now the military, industrial, media, academic complex. Our next speaker is Lavinia Steinfort. Lavinia is an eco-feminist. She is a political geographer an activist who works on public alternatives and is based at the Transnational Institute in Netherlands. Lavinia, a concern of the Asia-Europe People's Forum and civil society and smaller states really is the dislink between militarization and the search for global hegemony and the gross neglect of people's issues, of gender issues, of climate change, of ecological sustainability. We would really like your arguments as an eco-feminist here. And since you're going to be speaking in this round mainly, you have quite a lot of time, 11 to 12 minutes. So Lavinia, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Anu, and thanks so much to the organizers, and also for the great, brilliant interventions of Marga and Walden. So let me start by saying that for a growing number of communities, it has become painfully clear that we are living through highly militarized and extractive times, where colonial capitalist patriarchies are profiting from death-making activities, as pointed out by Marxist scholar Titi Bhattacharya. So this is the case in the arms, border, and surveillance industries, but also very much true for public goods and services. By privatizing our commons, our collective health, and our public services, the corporate incumbent powers exploit the gendered and racialized workers who care for society, attack the 99% whose well-being depend on a human economy, and destroy the ecological support systems, life support systems, which underpin, well, everything, right? So for all earthlings to survive and thrive, ecofeminism shows us that power doesn't solely manifest itself in structures of domination. Power also exists as interdependent collective efforts towards liberation. For me, as an ecofeminist and many others, interdependence doesn't only mean solidarity with humans, but also with the more than human world, because only when we recognize that we're fundamentally equal to and in need of countless other beings, whether human or otherwise, we can put care, as in all the life-making processes, at the center of our deeds and demands. But luckily, many popular movements across the world are reshaping life-making practices, reclaiming public services, and remaking society based on social and environmental justice. So I will now say a bit about deprivatizing and democratizing public services as a two-sided political strategy that has the potential to put ecofeminism into practice. So in the new, in TNI's new book, The Future is Public, we, together with many partners, among which trade unions and civil society and academics, count over 1,400 reclaimed and newly created public services in 58 countries around the world, and this involves more than 2,400 municipalities. Although privatization, or I have to say, although deprivatization is no guarantee for democratization, they are very much in need of each other. Deprivatization and democratization simply work better hand in hand. Many reclaimed or new public services can and have resulted in community wealth building, increased democratic control, better working conditions, lower fees for residents, enhanced service quality and public health, but also for measures to tackle the climate crisis. So I will now give a few examples what that looks like in practice. Take, for example, the social protection program that the new Selangor government in Malaysia created in 2008. The program aimed to improve the welfare of various vulnerable groups in the areas of food, water, social care, housing, education, and transportation. Then 2 years later, a women's health scheme was launched, which provides free mammograms to women up from the age of 35. Another source of inspiration is the public cooperative partnership in Wolfhagen, Germany. This partnership followed after the municipality reclaimed the electricity grid and decided to finance and install wind power together with its citizens. all the as the citizen cooperative became for 25% the owner of the utility company, electricity prices lowered. The number of energy staff nearly doubled, and the kindergarten now receives funding through this partnership. And then there's also another example where we can learn a lot from, which happened with the water remunicipalization in Terrassa, Catalonia, where the water remunicipalization led to new forms of democratic decision-making. So with the support of civil society, the city created a water observatory, giving users the legal right to participate in public management. Just to rush to another example, because yeah, there are just luckily a growing number of them. There is the unit for disaster risk reduction and rehabilitation that the Philippine surfing town of La Nuza created in order to improve its resilience in the face of a worsening climate crisis. So this kind of new local government service takes into account the interdependence between people's livelihoods and the entire ecosystem, because the local economy is highly dependent upon its forests, watersheds, and mangroves. So in order to enhance the town's resilience, the unit is specifically prioritizing the needs of women, children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. So this shows how responsive and democratic public services can really put the needs of most vulnerable, or actually most oppressed people, at the center. And these calls and actions for democratic public services can be understood in relation to a new radical municipalism that ignited with 15M and resulted in many citizen platforms that have been taking power in the municipalities across Spain, but also more recently across France. But we've also seen participatory forms of municipal power, from Valparaiso in Chile to Yemna in Tunisia, as well as these new forms in Eastern European cities of Gdansk, Prague, and Budapest. So to zoom in on the example in Gdansk, Poland, since 2016, they have a randomly selected citizen assembly in place. These 60 or so residents are really representative of the population based on sex, age, neighborhood, and education level. And because their decisions are actually binding, the municipality is obliged to take progressive action and has already done so in the field of flood mitigation, civic participation, air pollution, and the rights of LGBTQI people. So as the feminist municipalists such as Laura Roth and Karen Tapp made clear, municipalism has the potential to feminize politics by really changing how politics are done. In other words, changing who gets listened to, visibilizing daily experience of inequality, and replacing competition and hierarchy with collaboration and horizontal decision-making. This in order to no longer treat people as passive subjects, but as political, active people and subjects, right? So this will also help us to see local alternatives as prefiguring the diversity of worlds that could, in concert, transform imperial capitalism. In other words, feminist municipalism and reclaiming public services are aiming big. This is exemplified by the growing number of municipalities that call on the European Union to include climate finance for towns and cities in its recovery package, or take the calls for fair, clean, and democratic energy. Here, civil society, together with trade unions, propose a system-wide reclaiming of the energy sector that combines country-level planning and democratic state-owned utilities with municipal and community-led enterprises. Such alliances will enable us to practice energy and a livable climate as human rights, common goods, and public services. So to slowly conclude, strategies of deprivatization and democratization are being shaped and refined in close relation with other forces for change. In particular, I would like to acknowledge the great work done by many social movements from Asia to Africa to Latin America, which have pushed civil society groups in Europe to hold our governments and corporate powers accountable. So accountable by demanding historic reparations, by decolonizing domestic and international institutions, and by degrowing this deadly GDP-obsessed economic model. So I hope my intervention has given a bit of a glimpse of some of the real and radical alternatives that so many people are already building. Yet we clearly have to find many more ways to practice international ecofeminist solidarity in order to outlive the deadly activities of our military capitalist complex. So I'll end there now.
Thank you very much, Lavinia. And this is exactly what we were looking for. But Marga ended in saying that there is hope, and you have shown that there's not just a theoretical idea of hope, but there are actual people's alternatives which are coming up. And I think you can see a lot of these examples. I've read them on the TNI website and on our AEPF website also. The second issue I want to just state before we go on to our second round is that the participants can type in their questions in the Q&A chat box. That way they won't get lost. And the speakers can, in the third round, actually answer them. Also, since Tariq Ali has not joined, there must be a valid reason for that. I would now ask Marga to take the lead in this next round and really talk something on popular perceptions about, what are the popular ideas on China, the various hegemonies, the cracks in the hegemonies as she spoke about. Can social movements actually have a say in something like geopolitics, which has kept civil society out of it, unlike other practices and policies? Marga?
Yeah, thank you. Let me start by saying that some days ago, a Brazilian intellectual friend of mine told me that we, the progressive people, we don't have the right to be pessimists, in a sense that what is in crisis is capitalism, not our dreams or our capacity of imagining a different way of doing things based on human values, justice, solidarity, and cooperation. That is not in crisis. What is in crisis is the opposite, is the way the neoliberalism and capitalism has put the world in crisis as today. So that is the basis for my small optimism for the near future. Honestly said that. What I think, at least on the European perspective, I mean, not wide world, but European perspective, my sensation is that we are living in a moment where I don't see the European population supporting a war, for instance, or allowing the government to support US imperialism as the way they did in Iraq or in Libya or in the past. I honestly think that this young generation of people who has grown in an economic crisis and all the debates around economic crisis and no perspectives of future besides precarization of work. And on the other side, the different struggles that we can see in the continent, and all allow me to think that we as Europeans populations can accept so easily the idea of a new military intervention. Maybe China South Sea is very far from Europe, and that could be possible. But even though I think it will be more complicated for the for the military forces to act as in the previous past. So I think the pacifist movement is one of the strengths we have, or we must also to help to growth in order to stop this kind of menaces the world have in terms of military interventions in Asia or in Latin America, like Venezuela, under threat of the United States all the time, or Cuba, of course, or other parts of the world. But also let me stress also that even during this pandemic, particularly in the last 10 years, there had been a huge movement in Europe that changed or shift a little the perception of the part of the population in terms of human values. The first one is the climate change movement. I must say that at least in Europe, as you know, as I do, it is amazing how many people is entering this movement, and through entering the analysis of the climate change, going also to the question of why the climate change is happening and who is responsible for this. And I think, and this is my sensation, my idea is that this movement is there and is going to come back in the moment the streets are open again. Secondly, the feminist movement, as Lavinia said perfectly well before, I think is not coming back from the feminist movement and Europe. And it's not only a question of putting the women in the center of our policies of understanding of the world. It's a question of justice, and it's a question of understanding that all human beings are equals. And that is really very important. And I think a step forward in the path that we want to do for a better world. And also, on the last time, I think that we saw the classical class struggle that is still in the companies, in the streets, and it's really serious and very important in this particular moment where I must insist, at least in Europe, we are facing a moment where we can decrease our GDP more than 11–12%. For Spain, it's a decrease of 18%. That means million people unemployed. That means that the working class as a class, can also and is also fighting for a different way of doing things and changing the way capitalism is acting in the last year. So I would like to finish this intervention saying only that despite the terrible situation we are living, that I think we can see is the growing of some kind of movement, traditional movements like the working class, or new movements like feminism and ecology. What I would like to see is a connection among all of them based on the young people who wants and need to fight for a better future for them and for the rest of the world. I think this broad we must to help, to push, to think, and to act to make it real. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marga, for this analysis. And now we go back to Walden. Walden, after that brilliant analysis, which we had the chance to see even on PowerPoint, would you like to give some recommendations that civil society and social movements can push for a different kind of geopolitics, including that which is coming, to be in the Southeast Asia and in, as you described, the Philippines, Eastern Sea, and what others call South China Sea. Walden?
Yes. Let me just begin by giving a brief alternative, addressing mainly the South China Sea, or what we call the West Philippine Sea. And Kathy, could you just flash the 4-point diplomatic strategy that can be promoted with the support of civil society in both in the region and globally. So this is something that we have proposed. First of all, since strategic defense is a central motivation for China's behavior, the Philippines and China can agree to have bilateral talks on how to bring down the tension between the countries. The aim of these talks will not be to settle the territorial issue, but to negotiate military de-escalation. One possible proposal could be a freeze in China's base building activities in exchange for a freeze in the implementation of the latest military agreement that the Philippines has with the United States, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which allows the United States to use Philippine bases for its military build-up in that country. And these bases are being actively built up at this point in time with Philippine government support. Second, perhaps simultaneously with the Philippine-China bilateral talks, China should take seriously the Association for Southeast Asian Nations' long-standing offer to hold multilateral talks on a code of conduct to govern the maritime behavior of all parties with claims to the South China Sea that China agreed to back in 2002. And third, should these two confidence-building measures achieve some success, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and China could move on to negotiations to achieve significant demilitarization and denuclearization of the South China Sea, with the goal of coming up with a multilateral treaty that would be binding on all parties, including third parties like the United States. Such an agreement, of course, would necessitate abandoning the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States on the part of the Philippines and dismantling of military structures in the South China Sea on the part of China. Now, this agreement would complement two earlier ASEAN agreements: the agreement to make ASEAN a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, SOPFAN, and the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone. And these are two major achievements of ASEAN. It could also be the forerunner of an East Asia-wide collective security treaty that would replace a dangerous and volatile balance of power politics that simply promotes an uncontrollable arms race. And fourth, ASEAN and China could begin the process of resolving their competing claims on exclusive economic zones and continental shelves, and discussing joint development of fisheries and other resources. Given political sensitivities, this might be de facto arrangements instead of full-blown treaties or agreements, and would not necessitate the concerned parties formally abandoning their claims. And last slide, please. That was the last slide. Okay. So, you know, since there was a very great concern on the part of you know, people who want, you know, to hear about specifically this area, which has been in the headlines a lot. And as Anuradha said, it's oftentimes the American narrative or the Pentagon narrative that dominates the news. You know, so that looking at it from a different perspective, if you were, for instance, Chinese, and you realize that your military forces, especially your naval forces, are bottled up in the South China Sea, and that you are surrounded by hundreds of US military bases, including the 7th Fleet, which is a mobile base with, you know, the most advanced aircraft carriers in the world, and with superb, you know, electronic capabilities that the Chinese cannot match at all at this point. And when we talk about cyber warfare on the part of the United States, we're not just talking about the state sector. As Shoshana Zuboff has shown, Google and Apple and Microsoft, the big tech giants, are working hand in glove with, you know, the Pentagon. So, you know, of course, for the Pentagon, it's a very convenient to project this idea that somehow the Chinese are quite advanced in cyber warfare. But, you know, that really is more propaganda. So basically, this is it. China has a strategic dilemma in the southeastern China. How does it break out of that? And as I said, again, the strategic concern is valid, you know. The way that China has gone about it is what has not been good or not valid, because it has violated the territorial rights and economic rights of its neighbors that share the South China Sea. And we propose, in fact, a different kind of process, which would be peaceful, collective, aim at demilitarizing and denuclearizing the area, which would benefit not just China, but all of us in the South, in the South China Sea. So, we need to be able to bring out, this, which I feel to be the more valid narrative, as opposed to the dominant Pentagon-dominated narrative, which wants to project this superpower military China, but which is just not backed by the facts. The United States is so much more advanced in all areas of the military that basically any look at all dimensions of the military balance and strategy, China is quite far behind at this point. So let me just end there for the time being, and maybe as we go along, we can discuss some of the broader issues that have been brought up by Lavinia and Marga around, basically where capitalism is at this point in time, where neoliberalism is at, the rise of authoritarianism in the West. Those are extremely important issues. But since I was asked to address specifically the U.S.-China dimension, we can move from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walden. That was really an excellent kind of recommendations, which I think a lot of civil society groups, social movements, etc., can take up the recommendations from all three of our speakers. I can see there are a lot of questions which our audience is asking. So now we're on to the interactive section, and I'll hand over this to my co-host, Chris, to put the questions to the panelists and then ask for conclusions. Chris?
Thank you, Anu, and thank you, speakers, for this very interesting interventions. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Maybe for Walden, there is quite a lot of questions, of course, on the strategy of China, say the modernization of its military equipment, and turning into like a winning or more defensive military force, offensive military force by 2049. Do you also see there links with the, say, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative? Is China also, building its military capacity in the region while in fact deploying the Belt and Road, projects, and of course also, let's say, the position versus Taiwan is also was also one of the questions.
Okay, let me respond to that. I would just like to bring up a number of things. First of all, even the Pentagon says that China has not moved towards a strategic offensive military posture, that it continues to be on the strategic defensive. So, I mean, and I think the Defense Department of the United States would have had credibility problems, if it had claimed this. Okay. Secondly, yes, there has been some recent efforts to upgrade the nuclear strategic capabilities, but China is still quite far behind when it comes to that. There has been no qualitative leap in terms of weapon systems in the strategic nuclear area. Third, there has been an effort to really begin to build up the Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy. But, you know, I would just like to say that China has 2 aircraft carriers that are Soviet era design. And the first aircraft carrier was actually purchased from Ukraine, and it was about to go into the scrapyard. But the Chinese thought, maybe we can use this as a model for aircraft carriers. And there is now a second aircraft carrier that's been based on that was commissioned about a year and a half ago. But, you know, these are, what we're talking about is, if you compare these aircraft carriers to the latest US aircraft carrier, which is the USS Gerald Ford, you're talking about light years away. You have Soviet era, you know, very small aircraft carriers compared to this floating fortresses that the US Navy has. And I think it's important to mention that, because aircraft carriers are the main indicator of offensive capabilities when it comes to warfare. Does China have you know, offensive intent at this point in time? Okay. Let's face it, China has only one overseas base, Djibouti. And it is not at all clear that this so-called base in Sri Lanka is really intended as a military base for China. This, you know, a number of military experts who've looked at that says, you know, that the base, you know, this Chinese facility in Sri Lanka is not really being built up to be a military base at this point, or at least the evidence is not there. There is this base in Djibouti, which China has used in order to contribute to the efforts to counter piracy in, you know, that region. Yes, China has made a lot of ship visits recently. But these are mainly diplomatic things. They go to different countries, and you know, to show the flag, that sort of thing. But these are mainly diplomatic issues. So basically, we have not had a departure from the long-standing Chinese military posture of strategic defense. And when even the Pentagon admits that, you know, that's a very interesting, you know, admission. Okay, so you know, I mean, this is, you know, this is again, we come right back into why is the South China Sea so such a hotspot. And here again, you know, the concerns have been valid. The methods by which China has tried to implement its strategic defensive have been wrong. Okay, and I think there is still a chance that you can get an ASEAN-China collective effort to demilitarize the area. Okay, because at this point in time, the trade war between the United States and China has been sharpening. And even if the Democrats win the elections, the Democrats are also committed to a strong anti-China policy. And it's very difficult at that point to say that, oh, there's economic competition on the one hand, but that's not going to translate into military warfare. You cannot make that assumption at this point in time. So the biggest in the East and South China Sea, the biggest problem really is the offensive posture of the United States. Okay, as the Vietnamese said, okay, when I was visiting as part of a parliamentary delegation a few years ago, things are so tense that a ship collision, say between a Chinese naval ship and a US military vessel, can rapidly escalate from a collision to a higher form of warfare. That's how tense it is there in this region at this point in time. So, so I would just like to end there and give the others a chance to engage in some of the broader issues, and maybe not just this narrowly military
But
area.
maybe still one question that is related to that. There were some questions from, mainly from Europeans or people living in Europe. What position should Europe take? Should they, I mean, is there an option to stay neutral as Europe?
Yes, I think that Europe, must take a position of bringing down the tensions between the United States and China at this point in time. And I think that what we have seen under the Trump administration is, that in fact, because of all the unpredictable nature of Trump's initiatives, there has been an increasing fraying of the Western alliance. I mean, it's basically not the solid alliance that it was in the past. And I think civil society can begin to come in and follow up on what happened during the war in Iraq. If you remember, in the war in Iraq, France and Germany did not join the US military effort. Of course, when the Libyan intervention took place, they lapsed back to supporting the United States, President Obama's interventionist postures in Libya. But I think that the possibilities for a more independent policy on the part of Europe at this point are greater than it was in the past. But it would have to be, of course, it would have to be something that civil society, in fact, takes a major part in at this point in time. On the question of the Belt and Road Initiative, I just don't think that we can say that that's an imperial design. In fact, my analysis of that, and which came out in this publication that we did on China and imperial power in the image of the West, the Belt and Road Initiative is really an effort to export China's tremendous surplus capacity, which is, there's such overcapacity in Chinese industry at this point. It's dragging down the whole economy. It's dragging down profitability, and they've got to export that, to regions outside in order to regain a measure of profitability. In fact, even many Chinese scholars would say, that this is really a drive, that's driven by pure economics of surplus capacity, overproduction, rather than something that is plotted by imperial design. I think the biggest problem with the Belt and Road Initiative isn't so much that it's like an old imperial design. It's just that, as Arundatis Roy said, these are developmentalist, gigantistic projects, being imposed from above with tremendous environmental consequences. They are 20th century kind of development projects, the kind that you experienced in the Soviet Union back during Stalin's time, the Hoover Dam in the United States. These are 20th century technocratic development for the 21st century, and it is ecologically very damaging. And I think that a number of the countries that have gotten Belt and Road support are beginning to realize the ecological consequences of this effort by China to export its surplus industrial capacity. So I would be very critical of claims that it is an imperial design. And again, this is mainly something that comes from people like Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the United States, at this point in time. So that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Walden, for this extensive answer. There are many questions on say the geopolitical and military situation in Asia, but I would also like to raise a question to Marga. Marga, there is some concern. There has been a lot of strict measures also in Europe, where let's say the freedom of people, freedom of movement has been has been restricted. Do you see a long-term impact of these policies which are now being implemented during this exceptional time?
Yes, of course. I mean, basically, even in Europe, this lockdown or all these measures to control the moving of people are in Europe has been accepted by the majority of the population. It is true also that in two particular countries, which is Poland and Hungary, the far-right governments use these lockdowns to attack civil rights. So it's a menace that we have there. I don't think this is going to spread for the rest of Europe, but let's see what is going to happen. What I think the perfect word to define the situation today is uncertainty. I mean, we don't really know what is going to happen and the new way of reaction for the governments in order to stop the pandemic. Maybe I said this because I live in Madrid. Madrid today is coming back to a state of emergency because of the spread of the virus is not contained yet. No? So in a continent like Europe, you know that we are supposed to have excellent healthcare system. We're supposed to have a protection shield for the people that we are discovering that is not so. No? And also particularly because just only want to stress that Europe is not homogeneous, of course not. No? So we can see now clearly the division inside Europe, no? Meaning the south and the north and the east. No? I mean the two peripheries that are suffering particularly from this pandemic, and clearly we're going to have political influence and changes after this. Clearly, I'm sure of that. Yeah.
Mm. And Lavinia, there's also a question on, let's say, how the feminist movement is this movement was this movement able to in fact feminize or the international politics? Let's say, for instance, within the UN, we are I think 25 years later after Beijing conference. Has that really? Do you see a progress there? And on what topics do you see progress, say, on gender equality within the international atmosphere, and maybe also related to the peace and security movement?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. I think the progress has been made much more on the ground, on the grassroots level, as we should, of course, move this higher up. But I think the feminist movement has many different forms, and in the last more recent years, we see much more cross-learning happening, where the feminisms in Europe actually are now much more listening to the different Black feminisms in Europe and across the world, but also to indigenous feminism, to socialist feminism, and becoming much more radical. And of course, there has been a radical strand all along, but how there is now much more than before a window of opportunity to radicalize mainstream feminism, where we see these learnings going on. I think this is what we should be building on in order to actually have a more feminist international, financial, geopolitical system in place. So we're not there yet, but we have seen important steps, on grassroots level.
There are also some questions, Marga, on let's say a bit linking with the discussion with Walden. How should say Europe position itself in this say geopolitical context? Do you see, in your perception, is the peace movement still strong in Europe, and what role can it play in this say geopolitical strategic game?
Well, that is complicated to answer, but because despite, I think Europe, it's not Europe, but the countries inside the European Union, which is not the same, are, I don't know, let's say, quite proud to be, let's say, some kind of independence or autonomous for the United States. It is not true. I mean, the United States foreign policy is imposed in Europe and supported almost with no question, at least until today. But what is true is in this trade war among China and the United States, the Euro position is weakening day by day, but at the same time, it's like it's a crisis inside the European Union, not only because of the Brexit, but also because of the geopolitical trade war. In where I think the European Union doesn't really know what to do or how to react. But at the moment, it is not in an authoritative way or supporting something like the European Sea as crazy as Donald Trump administration. So another crack in the cultural hegemony of the United States is precisely the figure of Donald Trump, which is, I think, not supported unless, I don't know, Boris Johnson or part of the far right in Europe, but not the majority of the population. I can say that on my perception, I don't see the European Union supporting any military adventure of the US administration in the near future. We have enough problems inside the European Union to support blindly as we supported in the past. NATO is still very strong. And we have military bases almost in every country, not in every country, but at least in the biggest countries. But I must insist, even the military hegemony of the United States is amazingly strong. It is not so supportive by the population, and I don't see this support. There is some conflict in Asia, or there is some conflict in Venezuela to support that. But the problem is, I think the Pentagon is going to use another way of doing things, not the direct military intervention that they are doing, I insist, in Venezuela, or the blockade in Cuba, or a different way of acting to menacing and imposing their foreign policies in different countries. So, and this is not so obvious for the European population, something that we need also to go further in order to stop this kind of, my perspective, injustice, imperialism. Nevertheless, I think to answer your question, our analysis said that at this very moment, we don't see the European Union supporting any imperialist attack from part of the United States. But let's see, because we have Poland, Hungary, UK, that they can also send troops like they sent in Libya, Afghanistan, or Iraq. But I don't see the possibility really in the near future, in the close future.
Thank you, Marga. There's of course many more questions, but we also have to look at our clock, and I would just like to raise one more question for Lavinia. In fact, in the chat box it was raised to Marga, but I think I think Lavinia might have a better or it refers more to her presentation. I think it's on say food production in Europe. We at this moment we see that food production is very highly industrialized, commercialized. What are the seeds there to make this food production, say, more healthy, more ecological, and more accessible also for common people.
Yes, hi. Thanks. I just had to unmute myself. Let me see. Yeah, I think that's a very important question. We clearly need to transform our food systems. I do wonder where the caution with de-urbanization comes from. Not to say that we should be doing that, but I think we do have to find a new relationship with the land, because at the moment we see that these new form or these known and new forms of militarization, extraction, and far-right politics have resulted in very twisted ways of how we appropriate land, exploit land, and exclude other people from living on it. So how we are now living in cities, and this is of course likely to increase only. I do think that the solidarity between the urban and the rural, which is actually not a dichotomy at all, but actually, we have to think maybe much more in regions and how to build solidarity between the more densely populated and the less densely populated places, especially since those who live in cities, including myself, are just so massively dependent on all the wealth and a lot of the labor that is happening elsewhere in so-called rural parts of the world. So I think then in terms of thinking more regionally, we also have to really relocalize our economies and build really resilient local systems of value production. And I think also that the public services story that I shared before very much shows how public services are a way of redistributing wealth and to some extent power if we democratize them. So the fact is that public services have this core quality where they should be universally accessible, so that it's not just those who are living in cities and who where you can have more profits because you have more so-called customers, that there is a subsidization and a redistribution of funds to also serve those with water, with transport, with post services in the corners of a territory or in the periphery and so on. So I think these material solidarities where the infrastructures of public services provide them could be a new basis for transforming our food systems, but also many other systems on which all of us depend. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anu will, say a last word, but I would just take the opportunity to say a big thanks to our interpreter, Farouk, who is providing the translation to Urdu. Thanks, Farouk. Anu, you have the last word.
Yeah, the last word is just thanks to our wonderful panelists, to the interpreter, to my co-host, Chris, to Kathy, for the backup, for our AEPF communication team, who is not visible, but Vishnu Narayan Singh and Tabitha Spence, who have been tweeting what you have been speaking throughout. And just to tell all the participants, we are grateful that you're here. This was also shown live on Facebook. It will be available, the recording, after 2 days on our YouTube channel, on the AEPF YouTube channel. And Zoom will send out the links to all those who registered. So those who missed this wonderful conference or web conference will have the opportunity to see it again, as it's going to stay on quite permanently in our own cyberspace. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Goodbye.